On February 16, 1990, the New York Post runs 6 words on its front page, and America decides it knows exactly who Marla Maples is. Best sex I've ever had. She would later insist she never said it. 28 years on, she told a reporter it came from someone else. By then, she'd already signed a document handed to her 5 days before her wedding. $1 million. A sweeping confidentiality clause. A 5-year deadline. Trump moved to separate in month 41 of the marriage. She has never told her own side. She still can't. And she's the only person who actually knows it. The story starts on a ski slope. But first, that headline. It was doing more work than anyone realized. The words ran under a photo of Trump, with a subhead framing them as gossip Marla had supposedly bragged to friends, not a quote she'd given to anyone. She was 26, from a small town in North Georgia, and had never given a single interview about him. Trump was still married to Ivana. Their divorce was 3 weeks old and already New York's loudest tabloid story. This was the moment Marla Maples stopped being a name in a gossip column and became a punchline with a face. In 2018, called for jury duty in Manhattan, Page 6 asked her about it directly. Her answer? She never said that. Someone else did. Then she added something stranger, which we'll come back to. There's a second account of where the line came from, and it needs a caveat. Jill Brooke, a former Post journalist, wrote in 2018 that she'd been in the room during a call where Trump pitched editor Jerry Nachman on a cover. Nachman reportedly told him a front page needs murder, money, or sex, and Trump supplied the line himself, then shouted for Marla to confirm it, with Brooke recalling a faint yes in the background. That's one witness's memory, surfacing 28 years later in a guest column, treated as recollection, not documentation. What isn't disputed, reaction inside Trump's own company. Barbara Rez, who ran his construction operations and had no reason to flatter the Post, later recalled his executives thought the headline was awful and worried about kids seeing it, while Trump thought it was terrific. So the first words the public ever heard from Marla Maples may not have been hers at all, and the man who benefited may have planted them himself. Hold that pattern. It repeats. She wasn't some accidental arrival. Marla Ann Maples was born in October 1963 in Cohutta, Georgia, a town barely big enough to qualify as one. Her mother, Ann, had modeled. Her father, Stanley Edward Maples, was a real estate developer, county commissioner, songwriter, and, per a 1990 Vanity Fair profile, a Baptist deacon. She grew up in a house where the family sold property, maintained its name through public office, performed faith every Sunday, and wrote songs on the side. She was homecoming queen her senior year at Northwest Whitfield High in Tunnel Hill, class secretary, played basketball, then attended the University of Georgia before heading north. Her first real screen credit in 1986 was a small part in Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive, essentially billed as a woman who screams. None of it was destiny, but it meant she arrived in New York already fluent in the gap between what a family is and what it's made to look like from the pew. She understood staging before she understood Manhattan. One more detail, held loosely since it comes from later reporting. In Confidence Man, Maggie Haberman writes, Maples traveled with a wedding dress packed, ready in case Trump ever decided the moment had come. A second-hand image of a woman waiting on someone else's timing. File it. It resurfaces later. Christmas 1989 Aspen. The Trumps were skiing, and so was Marla. No coincidence, and hadn't been for a while. How long the relationship had actually run is genuinely unsettled. Accounts place its start anywhere from the mid-1980s to 1989, and everyone with knowledge has reason to shade the date differently. What's solid is the confrontation on the mountain. Ivana confronted her. Ivana's 2017 memoir places it at lunch in front of her children, a version told from decades' distance by an interested party, but the collision itself was reported at the time and never seriously denied. Liz Smith broke the marriage story, and from there it became a circulation event that ran for months. Ivanka Trump later wrote that a reporter once asked her, as a small child, whether Marla's claims were true. Here's where the standard telling gets it backward. Marla is usually cast as a nobody dragged into a scandal she couldn't control. But look at what happened to her visibility over the next 2 years and ask who was steering it. She was on covers of papers she'd never spoken to, constantly on television. In 1991, she appeared at WrestleMania as a celebrity timekeeper and guested on Designing Women. That's not the trajectory of someone hiding. It's the trajectory of someone being deployed. The timing matters because 1990 was the worst year of Trump's professional life. The Taj Mahal opened in Atlantic City in April 1990 and started failing almost immediately. Within 2 years, he'd been through casino bankruptcies, surrendered the Trump shuttle, given up his yacht, and lost his stake in the plaza. His bankers put him on a personal allowance. The man selling himself as America's most successful businessman was, technically, insolvent. And the one asset that hadn't lost value was his name in the papers. The Ivana split cost him roughly $14 million, plus the Connecticut estate and $650,000 a year in child support. Remember that number. It explains most of what follows. They got engaged in 1991. He gave her a 7.45-carat emerald-cut Harry Winston diamond. That ring returns later, and not romantically. Then nothing happened for 2 years. They broke up and reconciled repeatedly, in public, with the tabloids keeping score. In August 1992, she took the only significant independent job of her adult life, joining Broadway's The Will Rogers Follies as Ziegfeld's favorite. Trump told the Washington Post beforehand that he thought she'd be great and that it took guts. Supportive on its face, set against something he'd say on national TV 18 months later, it curdles. What broke the stalemate wasn't a decision he made about her. Tiffany Ariana Trump was born October 13, 1993, in Florida. Marla was 29, Trump 47, fresh off the most expensive divorce in New York gossip history. Marla's public version is that the Long Island Railroad shooting that December shook him and prompted the proposal. A humane story she may fully believe. The reporting suggests something colder ran alongside it. Per Vanity Fair, his parents, Fred and Mary Trump, who didn't tolerate scandal, were angry he'd fathered a child outside marriage, while he was preparing to take his casino business public, meaning institutional investors, while his personal life ran in the Post every other week. A wedding solved both problems at once. Vanity Fair reports he asked his mother what he should do about Marla. Not a man in love seeking a blessing. A man asking for a recommendation. He decided to marry her. 1,000 invitations went out for the Plaza Ballroom on December 20th. Then, 5 days before the wedding, guests already booked, press already alerted, a document arrived. We know its contents because a copy reached a reporter. In 2019, Vanity Fair's Gabriel Sherman published the 1993 prenup, sourced from someone with access, including the attached financial disclosures. The terms: separation within 5 years meant $1 million plus another $1 million for a house. Tiffany's child support was set at $100,000 a year until 21, ending early if she took a full-time job, joined the military, or the Peace Corps. Marla waived any claim on his future wealth, and a confidentiality clause barred her from ever publishing any diary, memoir, letter, story, photograph, interview, article, essay, or account of any kind, whether fictionalized or not, concerning the marriage. Read that again, fictionalized or not. He didn't just close the door, he closed the novel. She'd reportedly asked for $25 million. A source close to her told Vanity Fair she caved 24 hours before the ceremony, under duress, while his position was simple. No prenup, no wedding. Then there's the arithmetic buried in the disclosures, which turns this from ugly to deliberate. Trump valued himself at $1.17 billion. Marla listed $100,000 in the bank. He never appeared on the Forbes billionaires list from 1990 through 1995. He'd just lost the casinos, the airline, the yacht, and the plaza. Sherman's point is sharp. Understating his wealth would have given her grounds later to void the deal for concealment. By overstating it, he made the contract harder to break. The vanity and the legal strategy were the same act. Marla later explained she believed they'd revisit and tear up the agreement after a few years. Nothing was ever torn up. The wedding was magnificent, and the guest list tells you who it was for. Roughly 1,000 people filled the Plaza Ballroom, a building Trump still had his name on and would lose within 2 years. Marla wore Carolina Herrera. There'd already been a press conference for the marriage license, hosted by Mayor David Dinkins. Champagne for the cameras. The bride was 2 months postpartum, 1 day past signing away her financial claim on the man she was marrying. Howard Stern attended. Asked by the Times for a prediction, he said it was probably tasteless to guess, but he'd give it 4 months. He undershot by 3.5 years and was still the most accurate person in the room. Photographs published by CNN in 2025 also show Jeffrey Epstein at the plaza that night, grinning in the background of a group shot. A fact about the room, not about the marriage, stated and set aside. What the marriage looked like from inside is hard to reconstruct, since the one person who lived it signed away the right to describe it. But you can read its shape from what she was permitted to do. She'd been a working actress on Broadway 5 months before the wedding. Afterward, that career effectively ends, replaced by work inside the family business. A joint cameo with Trump on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air in 1994, co-hosting Miss Universe in 1996 and 1997, and Miss USA in 1997. Pageants her husband owned. Not a career. A job at her husband's company selling her husband's brand. On March 10, 1994, less than 3 months into the marriage, Trump laid out the arrangement on ABC's Primetime Live, Marla seated beside him, interviewed by Nancy Collins. Asked about the women in his life, he said he loved creating stars, that he'd done it with Ivana and with Marla to some extent, and that once they became stars, the appeal for him was over. He called it a creation process, at one point comparing his wives to real estate. On her working, he admitted mixed feelings, saying while trying not to sound like a chauvinist that he'd go through the roof if he came home to no dinner. He floated the broader theory that putting a wife to work was dangerous and the single biggest cause of what happened with Ivana. Compare that to telling the Washington Post 2 years earlier that it took guts and she'd be great. Both statements are real. One came while he was still deciding whether to marry her. The other came after. She sat there while he said it. The moment that never made a headline but does the most damage. A man repeatedly explaining on the record exactly what she was for, while she had no contractual way to respond. The Robin Leach interview from the same period resurfaced in 2016 and is genuinely hard to watch. Asked which features the baby inherited from each parent, Trump says she's got Marla's legs, then gestures at his own chest and says, "They don't know if she's got this part yet, but time will tell." The baby was 1 year old. An honest account has to slow down here, because the decline wasn't a straight line. There were good years in the middle. Mar-a-Lago opened as a club in 1995. The family had a real life in Palm Beach, and photos exist that don't look staged. Trump has said, with little reason to doubt it, that she stuck by him through the worst of the early 90s. Telling Howard Stern right after the divorce that she was a good person, that they'd had a great time, that she was there for the worst of it. The most generous thing he ever said about her publicly, said in 1999 when it cost him nothing. By several accounts, she was also sharper about people than she got credit for. Per Wall Street Journal, reporting drawing on Mar-a-Lago staff recollections, Maples told employees something felt wrong about Epstein, and that she didn't want him near her or her husband, reportedly raising it with Trump's Florida security chief. Staff memories recounted decades later, weigh them accordingly. But if accurate, The woman everyone treated as decorative was the first in that house to say it out loud. None of it saved the marriage. It does explain why leaving wasn't obvious. Then came April 16, 1996. An incident endlessly cited and rarely understood correctly. A Palm Beach police report from that date describes an officer patrolling a deserted beach around 4 a.m., roughly 10 minutes from Mar-a-Lago, finding a man concealed under a lifeguard stand, identified as Trump bodyguard Spencer Wagner, with Marla Maples emerging from the dark nearby. That's the document. Everything on top of it is a different category of evidence. Her explanation? Wagner was driving her home from a party, she needed a bathroom, wandered onto the beach. The National Enquirer, sourcing the officer, ran it as scandal. Trump fired Wagner months later. Wagner then sold an account to the Globe claiming intimacy, a paid tabloid interview, among the least reliable testimony there is. Years later, his ex-wife told Inside Edition he'd always privately denied it, and that the accusation wrecked his working life. One police report, 3 incompatible stories on top, 2 sold and 1 given free. This can't be resolved on the evidence. What matters is what it was worth to the person who didn't need it resolved. A publicly circulating reason to end the marriage that had nothing to do with him. He waited over a year before acting, and when he finally moved in May 1997, the timing was pure calendar math. The prenup ran on a 5-year horizon. Under 5 years, the payout was fixed at $1 million plus the house money. Past 5, it shifted from a flat number to a percentage of his net worth. They married December 20th, 1993. The separation was announced May 1997. Month 41, 19 months to spare. We don't have to guess at the motive. Sources close to Trump told The New Yorker at the time the split had been timed precisely to stay under the 5-year mark, with one explaining plainly that even a small percentage of a very large number is a lot of money. Another told the Times it would be a huge mistake to risk it without total certainty about the person you're married to. Maggie Haberman's point in Confidence Man finishes it. Those quotes were anonymously placed by Trump and his lawyers. Not a leak, a message. He ended a marriage, then arranged for reporters to be told he'd done it to protect his money, while his wife of 3.5 years was legally barred from responding in any form. That's the real answer behind this story's title. Not the affair rumors, the tabloid noise, but a cruelty written on paper, placed there by him, then read aloud to the press on his own terms. That October, he published Trump, The Art of the Comeback, ghostwritten by Kate Boner, and reportedly finished 8 hours before deadline. In it, he explained both divorces. Ivana talked too much about work. Marla wanted him home earlier. And sadly, like so many couples, they drifted apart. Both ex-wives denied his accounts. Only one was legally free to say so publicly, and it wasn't Marla. The divorce finalized June 8, 1999. She received roughly $2 million, half earmarked for a home, plus child support. The confidentiality obligation survived intact. Then she did something almost entirely misread for 25 years. That autumn, London's Daily Telegraph published an interview in which she said the marriage was built on illusion, that Donald was never the man she wanted to marry, that she'd finally found the courage to walk away and stay away, and that motherhood made her less willing to tolerate his behavior. She was also quoted calling him driven by ego. Within days, a spokeswoman said the interviewer had quoted her out of context without ever specifying which quotes. Look at the mechanics. The statement gets out, gets printed, circulates through every American paper via the post, and there's a formal denial on record that names nothing and retracts nothing. She got her sentence into the world while keeping a defensible position under the contract. In 2000, she auctioned the 7.45-carat Harry Winston ring, the one he'd chosen in 1991. It sold for about $110,000. She gave part of the proceeds to charity. She'd signed away future wealth, the memoir, the interview, the diary, the photographs, the essay, fictionalized or not. She hadn't signed away the ring, so she sold it publicly and gave the money to strangers. The books never happened. In 2001, a manuscript called All That Glitters Is Not Gold was set for publication, then quietly abandoned by both Maples and the publisher. Years later, per page 6, a second attempt, It's About Time, with Judith Regan reportedly ready to publish, reportedly died because Trump wouldn't sign off. Treat that second detail as trade gossip. Treat the overall pattern as established. 2 manuscripts, 0 books, meaning the surviving written record of that marriage is the one he wrote in 8 hours in 1997, the one where they simply drifted apart. Consider what that accomplishes. Ivana wrote her books, gave depositions, sued, negotiated, published, appeared, and blamed Marla publicly for years. Melania's terms were reportedly revised after 2016 to better protect her. Marla is the only one of the 3 who's never told her story. Not for lack of things to say, but because she likely has more to say than either of the others, and remains contractually forbidden from saying it. And then, slowly, she stopped being a person the story merely happened to. She raised Tiffany mostly in California, mostly out of frame. When Trump ran for president in 2016 and the tabloid decade got excavated for parts, she had every commercial and emotional reason to speak. Every producer in New York was calling. Instead, she went on Dancing with the Stars in spring 2016, quick-stepping to Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, telling reporters she was campaigning for a Mirrorball trophy. Trump wished her luck publicly. On the Today Show in 2018, she discussed yoga and a music video shot in India. Asked whether her ex-husband had ever surprised her, she said she chooses not to judge anybody, mentioning almost in passing that they'd once discussed a presidential run back in the 90s and that she'd worried about the effect on his children. She attended the inauguration. She attended her daughter's wedding at Mar-a-Lago in 2022. By 2024, she was telling a London paper she'd been in caregiving mode. Her parents had passed, her daughter was settled, and that she was open to serving again if called. You can read all of that as a woman who made peace. Plenty do. Here's the other reading, the one the record supports. Silence was the only asset the agreement left her, and she spent 25 years refusing to spend it. Every year she doesn't publish, the untold version grows more valuable, and she stays inside the family's orbit. Her daughter carries the name. Her grandson, born in 2025, is the president's. She never attacked, so she was never expelled. She's the ex-wife with no memoir, no lawsuit, no feud, no quotes. And therefore the only one whose account has never been discounted, contradicted, or picked apart, because no one has ever heard it. Now go back to the front page. February 16th, 1990. 6 words that made her, in the public imagination, a woman who talked too much, cheap, indiscreet, boasting to her friends. That image held for 35 years. And there's a real possibility, supported by a former Post reporter's recollection and by the plain fact that Trump spent that decade feeding tabloids stories about himself, that she never opened her mouth at all, that the loudest thing she ever supposedly said was said for her, to sell papers. She spent 1990 being quoted without speaking. She's spent every year since choosing not to speak, which is a very different thing, the one power the contract could never reach. In 2018, on a courthouse bench during jury duty, a Post reporter asked her about the headline one more time. She said she never said it. Someone else did. Asked whether it was true, she said she wasn't going to talk about that the truth would come out, just not there. Then she winked. Her father sold real estate in a town of 600 people and served as county commissioner. She grew up watching a family decide when a property goes on the market. She learned the lesson early, and she's never once broken it. The most valuable thing you own is the one you haven't sold yet.